Well, there it is, WTiiWarcraft here with another map review. This map is called Rivulet RBTV Liga Final. So this map has been created by Tenshi, I believe, from the Rocket Beans TV Warcraft community. He's been creating maps each season that they have for competitive map seasons, and this is essentially a competitive 1 versus 1 map that we're going to be taking a look at. So let's do that. We have bottom left versus top right, red versus blue. A nice clear path towards one another, but loads of winding paths to divert your armies or your small raiding parties, depending on how you want to play this, and diverge around the map. There's 2 expansions each, which is interesting, especially since they're both so close. So what I would normally do is start off from the player 1's perspective and take a look at the nearby green camps, which is where you would be beginning in the game. So a lot of space in your initial base, nice and open. I wonder if perhaps the trees are too far away. You can probably still block off, I think, as a human player, whatnot. Now, let's start off with this nearby green camp. We have essentially... Oh, that's because I've done that. Here we go. 7 levels. Murloc Nightcrawler. Level 1 permanent item, so at least you're getting something valuable from that. Level 1 might be a little bit stingy in terms of a level 7 creep camp, but because they're all very small and easily manipulable... Is that a word? I'm going to use it. You can probably get away with that being a level 1. Obviously, you can pull this creep camp back, just focus this guy, and then move on with your day, so that's perfectly fine. Now we've got another green creep camp, which is closer towards your opponent's position. Looks a bit trickier. It's level 7 again. This guy, level 4 sea turtle, but with a level 2 charged item, so a bit more respectable. Again, you could pick this guy off and ignore the others, or do the whole creep camp and give yourself a little bit of extra experience. It's nice that there's a lot of stuff to creep. I think that's always a good option, actually, because the players can always choose if they would just want to kill a couple of creeps and then move on to another spot. Particularly a creep that's obviously going to give them a valued item. So I like the options rather than there being just one turtle. There's obviously extra things to kill if you wish to do so. There's 2 taverns and very close as well, so it gives the option for early game harass with a neutral hero if you so choose to do so, because there's a lot of creep camps nearby that the players essentially can access with that tavern. Now we got an orange creep camp fairly nearby. Barely orange. It's level 10. It has a Null Brute with a level 2 permanent item, Troll Berserker and Troll Trapper. So that's cool. I like that. A nice little group dynamic here. Ensnare makes it a bit harder to commit to this group without being punished, but the level 2 reward is also very good. Ancient of War could easily set up here and creep that. Night Elf could get busy with that. Human could easily creep it because it's so close. I would do this green camp next. Let's take a look at this. We got level 6 in total. So Spider Crab with the level 1 power up. So pretty unrewarding. Something you would probably do if you had to do something. Does that make sense? What I'm getting at here is if you can't essentially access the good creep camps and your opponent is chasing you down, you might have a bunch of footmen and they can creep this camp for you whilst, say for example, a Death Knight is chasing your Archmage. It will give you a little bit of experience, but not much in the way of an actual decent reward. So you're going out of your way to not get too much from this, but I think that also works because I've seen it in other maps and I think that's a fine concept. It doesn't always have to be rewarding, but as long as it's not too stingy and too many creatures give only level 1 power-ups. I guess we'll take a look at the natural expansion, which is reasonably tough to do. Level 14, the Poison, the Bloodlust, the Purge. This is going to have good control versus players trying to do this early on, but shouldn't be too difficult to do if you can amass a reasonable early game army with a few footmen and a couple of water elementals and hope for the best, I would guess, because the longer that you drag this fight, the worse it's going to go. So there is definitely some emphasis for doing this quickly. Otherwise, you will definitely be punished. It seems accessible enough for yourself, and your opponent can certainly beeline to it, but they've got to beeline it from a much longer direction, whereas here is much shorter, but there's a bit of a curvature. Now let's take a look at this orange camp, which is just a smallish level 10 orange camp. I really like the layout of this. It feels like it flows very nicely. Level 2 permanent from the High Priest. I think, is that a bit too rewarding? Potentially. I'm just trying to think about from a Blade Master perspective, if he comes in, wind walks, and he tries to snipe out the High Priest. 450 health, but he will have Inner Fire. He'll be taking some damage for it, but I think a Blade Master could pick that off and have about 200 health spare by the end of it, which is enough to obviously run away and get some healing. So very valuable creep camp for a Blade Master early on. Something to do for players whilst moving. That's what I also like as well, is a lot of these paths, they give you obviously a direction to take, but whilst you're taking that direction, you have options of what you're going to do. So you're never shy of something to do nearby. Let's take a look at the other gold mine, which is reasonably, definitely tougher. I think we can say that's definitely tougher. The Ogre Lord can often be manipulated though, so there is potential to pull him out and just creep him for the item, so we'll see what he's got. Level 5 permanent item. Yeah, that's really rewarding. Obviously, because if you was going to treat this creep camp as it is, that is pretty fair enough. It's very high level, level 23. A lot of creatures here can do a lot of damage to you, especially built up over time with Shockwave and Bloodlust. But I'm a little concerned because of how easy I think I would be able to pull him and then trap him between some trees. I don't really want to change the layout for that. I just think he might be a bit too rewarding, so you would have to like potentially bring his power down in terms of the item he drops, or just pull this gold mine ever so slightly further back so he's not going to travel quite so far. But I still think you can manipulate quite easily versus him. But then again, that's done for many other maps, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because you can argue that's a nice little trick that high level players get to do, and it's personally something I like to do because I can pull those tricks off. But I'm just thinking for the general balance aspect. This creep camp is a lot tougher, very hard to access. Very nice sort of aesthetics going on here with the shipyard. The laboratory, though, I assume that this and that is the only laboratory on the map. We have shop and laboratory. I'm just trying to think if you was looking to get yourself a goblin shredder without too much trouble of having to creep the camp, because you're not in a position where you can creep it, but you really need the lumber. This creep camp looks pretty tough to get around. Level 4 permanent items pretty damn generous as well for this guy. He is a tough guy with a tough creep camp, but I think you could potentially work with that. But it's pretty hard because you have made it tough, because you've put in the mud golem that slows. You've got like trappers here, 2 of them. So if you try to pick up a shredder, that shredder is going to die. The same goes for like a Zeppelin, so I'm not sure if you should have trappers by a goblin laboratory. Don't necessarily take my word for that though, but I'm just wondering from the purposes of if you weren't in a position to creep this camp, but you wanted to access the stuff from this camp, it's basically impossible, which does limit a little bit of strategy. Now, I guess we'll take a look at this orange camp. It's still going because there's a lot of stuff for players to do. We're just looking at this from player 1's perspective. Bear in mind that the map will be mirrored, so we don't need to take a look at too much more before we give it a little bit of a go. Items dropped, level 1 power up, or nothing. I've never seen that before. So you, you could do that creep camp and get nothing for it. You lose. Good day, sir. I'm not sure I like that. I think it's interesting, but I'm not sure I like it, because it's obviously RNG, and RNG is just going to kick you in the ass. Level 3 permanent item from an Ogre Magi. Pretty generous again for something that can potentially be done without too much trouble. Potentially soloable by a Blade Master even. He will take some serious damage from the Berserkers. With 2 Berserkers, he's going to take some serious damage. So I don't think a Blade Master can solo that. Not straight away in the game, unless maybe he was able to bring a Grunt and utilize the Grunt. That would probably be worth picking off early game if he was in this position, or obviously this position, moving over here. Take a Grunt and try to use the Grunt and your Blade Master to share the damage. You could even pop over to the shop here, pick up a Circlet, and then circle back over here with the Windwalk. Now let's take a look at the shop from this perspective over here. So 14. I think that's tough, but I don't think it's impossible. Level 3 charged is a nice cool item. I like to see that. I think you could access this shop, take some damage, but not too bad. You're not too committed. I don't like it if a shop's necessarily got like a creature that can purge or slow or something like that, or trap, because it just means that if a player just wants to access the shop, they get very heavily punished. If it's just purely taking damage, not too big of a deal. I really like this. There's just a lot of subtle pathways that allow the player to have so many options. It's interesting how technically you can go through the middle, but it's not as open as you might think it is because this is blocked off. So there is this battle between trying to avoid your opponent from either top or bottom, because there's only this pathway to take essentially to access your opponent, and this pathway. Otherwise, essentially, that's locked. This is locked. That's locked. So you could get a little bit cordoned off if your opponent is quick enough to stop you from actually even accessing the other side of the map. But I like this. I think the aesthetics are really nice. Lordaeron Summer's a beautiful map tile set. I just think there's a lot to do. I'm not sure about this external gold camp, but don't take that too much to heart, because again, I do give a hard time to anyone that has like an additional gold mine in a 1 versus 1 map, unless it's just a single gold mine to fight over. Very nice. I love the layout of doodads. I think it just gives the map essentially a personality. And from a top-down perspective, it's just pretty visually gorgeous. Like you can see, there's so many options to take or avoid and go around to try to avoid trouble. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at the object manager just to confirm the items, etc. So you got merchants, forest troll hut, but you don't actually have a mercenary camp, which is interesting because normally there's a mercenary camp. Perhaps the gold mine could be replaced with a mercenary camp, but we'll see. That's just a thought. As for the creatures, very heavy on the Lordaeron, which I think is fine because they all seem to work and they blend, and I think there's a good mix of creatures. There's a little bit of Sunken Ruins slipping in there, which can work because there's obviously water to work with on the map. So overall, very good. Very, very good. Definitely worthy of a place in the ladder pool for 1 versus 1. I would find it quite difficult to criticize it beyond that point. I can't see too many other issues. So really, it seems to work. So what I'll try to do, I guess, is test the map. Give it a little play. Have a little play with the creep camps. So utilize a little bit of the old cheating to get off to a quicker start. Because I can't fully test the map to do it proper justice, but we can at least get a bit of a feel for it, like in terms of how far you can get for how much time you spend traveling to that destination, the rewards, etc, etc. Fortunately, it's given me this, so I guess what I'm going to do instead is just load up the game and play it from there. So we'll do that. Let's stare at the lion. There we go. So, let's go to single player. Custom games. Look for my maps. Looks good on the minimap, obviously, as well. Very easy to see what's going on the minimap. Very clear. Now, I don't really care what race I get. And I think for the testing purposes, it's better to not have a computer, because I did a recent review of Brightwater Oasis. And I had the computer, but obviously I used cheats. And when you use cheats, the computer also gets access to those cheats. So it didn't take long until I was getting attacked by like a full-blown army of mountain giants and chimeras when I was only using an archmage and a few footmen. Looks like I've got human again, so that's fine. So let's take our peasants.
More work. Yes, me lord. Job done. Yes, me lord. Off I go then. Righto. Job done. All right. Job done. Job done. Ready to work. Yes, me lord. Ready to work.
Take like 5. The normal thing I normally do is you can take it as my word to a degree that, judging from the map perspective, the creek camps that are green should be no problem whatsoever. Players will be able to do those. That doesn't really need much demonstrating or much testing. So what I will typically do is I'll just move straight onto like an orange creek camp or something with a reasonable small army, like a couple of footmen, an archmage, or water elementals. So we obviously start with our natural expansion. So making our way there. Pop down a water elemental. Turn off the formations because that messes you up. And then begin with our creek camp. So let's get going. We should get purged here before the water elemental reaches. Now bring in the water elemental. Almost keep him slightly further back because we're still nuking that down. There's another purge. That can come off. Get the water elemental to tank. And the rest of the militia. Very easy to do. Not a problem whatsoever. Very minimal damage taken on the initial units. Not too much damage taken on the militia. So you can set up a tower. Set up your expansion. And that should be good. There's a nice open space to move now. Do you just come straight over to this corner, or do you beeline over in this direction to potentially take on an orange camp? Because I think it's nice to have so many options. Because it's a quicker line towards level 3. So the gameplay is going to be faster paced. There's nothing as painful as when you get stuck trying to get level 3 and there's nothing you can realistically creep without punishment from your opponent, or you just can't manage it with the units you currently have. So all of this is pretty darn good. Trial Priest even threw down an inner fire on a different mob, so that makes him even easier to fight. So I think the item reward from this guy, easy to pick up. Virtually no punishment for that whatsoever. What would be the solution? Potentially a level 1 power up from him, or a level 2 charged. And if you did a level 1, I like to do like a level 1. If it's a slightly tougher like orange camp, slightly tougher green camp to orange camp, I would do something like a level 1 green, a level 1 permanent item with a level 1 power up tome on another mob or something. It's just like if you do the whole creek camp, you get a little bit extra. Let's just try doing this creek camp, but pulling it back.
What do you need? On my way. Fine. Yes, my liege. Of course. What do you need? Say the word. Aye, my lord. Right. On my way. Aye, my lord. Of course. Right. On my way. Orders. What is it?
So you can do that pretty easily without too much trouble. You do get the poison though. And then you walk off if you want, or you can continue creeping it for the experience.
I can hardly wait. Whatever.
This creek camp will be a bit trickier because of the bloodlust, and there's the extra unit. So I wouldn't advise doing this creek camp unless you had like an extra couple of rifles or something to go along with that. Now, we'll just do a quick I see dead people cheat just to get a feel for how the layout is now. I don't creep the whole map because otherwise I'll be here all day. I'm just trying to give you a general vibe as to how the characters move, how they behave. You've got this interesting set of doodads here, which means that you could sort of pull the creek camp and then line them up in this position for like a flame strike, which is interesting because it increases strategy potential. Not that many people are going to try to do that because Blood Mage isn't exactly on the meta, but just something that entered my thought process. Not being able to go through the middle is kind of annoying. I get it though, because it is still open, and you can also come around here as well. I think there's still plenty of opportunity to get from left to right. It just feels a little bit cumbersome not being able to straight up move through the middle. But that's just a personal criticism, and that's not necessarily warranted. I think overall the creek can't speak for themselves. I guess I could have tested the ogre a little bit. This creek camp is like really hard. I suppose you could try to get the shredder out just to help with that though. Just to help with the creep camp. So now the shredder's coming. You've got the healing on the golem though as well, so that's definitely tough. This is no pushover. You've got the ensnare, you've got the inner fire. I think this creep camp might be a little bit extreme. Not impossible, but he's on the outskirts. I just don't know if it's a bit too tough, and it's a bit clunky to reach the goblin laboratory. Like, it's very closed in. It's not actually very open for ease of access. We've got level 3 water elementals, level 2, sorry, with level 3 archmage. Gonna lose that footman. I may as well just kill him off. He's just gonna get annoying. Let's try to pull this creek camp back in a moment.
Aye, sir. I'll take care of it. Get on. Fine. What do you need? Well, what do you need? You require my I'm your shooter. Time to go. Aye. Okay. Time to go. Shoot the cow.
You get the idea. So yeah, I think that can still be manipulated like I thought, where I barely took like any damage there, and you get a Hood of Cunning. And all it takes is a few riflemen or something to snipe that, and I could have an extra water mentor or two. So it's just something that can be done. It's not something that necessarily should be punished, because it's always cool to see someone do something like that. But you've always got to take into account that if it is easily manipulable, and I still don't know that's a word, you've got to be careful with what the character can drop. Anyway, I think overall, very, very nice design. It seems to work on a lot of levels. I think the in-game camera doesn't do it as much justice as it deserves though, because it's so zoomed in that sometimes you don't actually sort of get to appreciate the layout of the map. It feels like it would be nicer just to zoom out the camera again and sort of see the whole map in its glory. But you just got to work with it. I think the sort of like the water effects are more or less on point, nice and shallow, but there's little islands where the water or the shore cannot reach. So overall, very good. That's my review. I'm going to leave it at that, because I think that pretty much hits the nail on the head, and you should probably submit that to be played on the ladder, to be quite frank. Manipulable is indeed a word. Okay, well, fair enough. I'm not crazy. So there you go. Yep. Thank you very, very much for watching. Thumbs up, subscribe. A map review plus gameplay test of Rivulet RBTV Liga Final. Very cool. I like it a lot. Again, the additional gold mine, not 100% sold on that, and the Goblin Merchant, no, the Goblin Lab might be a bit too tough. Otherwise, everything else seems to flow very nicely.